welcome to our session. Design is Action for Social Change. So I'm here with Laura Teicher. So she is Executive Director for Greentown Learn. Sorry for that. And with Oke Hauser. So he is lead for Mini Living. So I'm the solution lead for city solution at Dassault Systèmes. So we are focusing on really bridging the gap between buildings, also on the manufacturing side, and cities, really supporting our customers to make an impact, also how to create livable cities. And so I'm here with a great team, great speakers in this area, also for the how the city and also how we can make a change, a social change in our city. So every year we have over 74 million more inhabitants of the world, and they need a change. So we have more and more energy demand and also for housing. So we need to think on new ideas for living and also to work with new startups and innovators on this field. So I'm very happy to be with both of you. And maybe, Oke, you can start also introducing you and your work.
Yes, of course. Welcome, everybody. Thank you, first of all, of course, Dassault Systèmes for inviting us and me. And, of course, also a big thank you to you. I know it's a busy week. Everybody has a hectic schedule to taking your time and joining us for this conversation. So, my name is Oke Hauser. I'm the creative lead of Mini Living. I'm also an architect. And you might wonder, actually, what is an architect doing at a car company? To give you a little bit of insight, I have to step back 60 years in time to 1959 was the year when the first Mini was actually designed and built. It was based on three basic ideas and principles. One was creative use of space, how you can shrink down basically a big car to the minimum that you need while still offering all. With the help of creative use of space, clever design, and of course, if you've ever driven a Mini, it's a fun experience as well. Well, now 60 years later, of course, we're still focusing on how to innovate mobility, but we became a much broader brand, or like we want to think about the city in a more holistic way. So we started several initiatives roughly 4 years ago. So we have, of course, a focus on how to move inside of cities, but we also have a startup accelerator that's based in New York. We have a physical presence in Brooklyn, basically a place for designers to work, but it's open to all. We have an interest in fashion and how to influence fashion in the future, and of course we're interested in how will people live in the future inside of cities. So this is the project that I'm responsible for. And the Mini itself is basically a small piece of moving architecture. It's a spatial concept at the end. Thinking about the original Mini was designed placing 4 people on the floor and like drawing with a chalk circles around them, thinking about how much space do we really need to move inside of dense urban areas. And we're translating these ideas to reinvent housing the same way as we did mobility back then. So when we take a look at where we live, right, this is a picture from New Year's Eve 1969. So Mini was 10 years old by then. There was roughly 4 billion people living on the planet back then. More or less the same amount of people today is just living inside of cities. Since then, basically, people move towards city. We have the highest rate of urbanization, and of course, there's a dynamic which is increasing and increasing. But when you take a look at how people actually live inside of cities, you get results like this. Like, for example, this is Hong Kong. This is California, Shanghai. This is also Shanghai. And the question is, like, is there really space? Is those cities really, like, do they have a human scale? Is there places that connect people with each other? How is public space integrated when the only connection to the building itself becomes a mall, which is basically a privatized wall? So we started 3.5 years ago with the Mini Living program, thinking about how can architecture and design help to connect people with each other. With various installations it's here in Milan, it's Salone Mobile, also at the London Design Festival. We traveled the world, starting conversation like what influences the future of architecture and the future of how we really want to live inside of cities, based on the idea of a big life on a small footprint, meaning you can maybe shrink down in space while still have it all. And I would just like to very quickly go through the project that we've done so far. So we started in Milan with the idea of a micro apartment that could open up its functions to the neighbors and share them with each other. Some impressions from our first project. Then we continued this idea of the potential blurring the boundaries between private and public by placing public accessibility functions as temporary extensions to your private apartment in empty urban plots in East London, offering spaces to meet your friends, just to hang out and have a moment of privacy, to work, and of course, just enjoy the moment, let's say. This is a project we did 2 years ago here in Milan. It was our tackle on how to live more sustainable in the future. And our idea was to create a more conscious way, or how can architecture create a more conscious way, connecting people to the most natural resource, water and light. So we built a building without any walls or any floors, completely transparent and exposing you basically to nature which exists in cities as well. This is another small series of projects we've done over the last 2 years, the so-called urban cabin concept, where we placed, always based on the same idea, a 14 square meter small micro apartment in the public space, and it always reflected the local background of the city we're in. So this was in Beijing, an interpretation of the traditional Hutong typology of housing in the city. And as you can see, it's always about opening up, connecting you to the outside, connecting you to the city, rather than to create a hermetic experience, because we believe that there's a high potential in sharing things and space with each other to create a more sustainable and also a more human-centric future for our cities. Some impressions from the project of the urban cabin in Beijing, and this year we take it one step further. So at the moment we're renovating 5 buildings in the heart of Shanghai into places to live, work and play. It was a very hermetic compound when we started the project, so we totally opened up to the public. We integrated also mobility in it, so it becomes more of a holistic vision of how you can provide an idea how we can share space, services in the future together to create better urban environments. But the main topic is how to connect people and how to connect people that live in a building with the city itself. It's also like this big element in front, this big structural element is a public urban gallery. So it's all about opening up the buildings to the city itself, inviting the city in, and connect you really to the place that you actually live. As you can see from the first project with the rotating walls, there's a rendering of the apartments. We're very interested in the potential that lies between opening yourself up to be exposed to new ideas, to live in a diverse community, to exchange and to grow on a personal level in those communities. There's various spaces in the project stretched throughout that the public can use. There's workplaces. We have 3 roof terraces offering about the future of food, but it's really the main thing is it's public accessible. So it's not an exclusive community, it's not a club-like atmosphere, it's rather a real urban building that we're trying to achieve. So Shanghai is the beginning. We're also working on a project in New York and Berlin at the moment. All of them will be connected, so you can easily also switch locations between the different projects. And of course, we would love to come to Milan in the future also with a project. These are some impressions from the construction site in Shanghai. It was 2 weeks ago, roughly. And as you can see, things are under heavy work. We have a couple of months left to open, and I'm very excited to provide a permanent home for people in the future with Mini, and also to see and learn from the residents and from the public what is their reaction to gain more knowledge, more understanding, and to continuously improve what we're doing. So that's my intro.
Great. Thank you so much, Oke. So my background is in architecture, and So I had also a journey. We founded a startup in the urban planning field, and our focus was really helping city planners and urban designers communicate very well with the citizens, different stakeholders, and to scale it. And I know from my experience how hard this is to find the good business model and also the tools, and to have a great network surrounding it. And so I'm really happy that you are here, Laura. And so maybe you can explain us a little bit about your initiative and what you are doing with these amazing startups and supporting them.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ante. And thank you again, Dassault Systèmes, for having us here today. It's really great to be speaking with all of you about this important topic, because design really is a crucial element of driving social change, which is what both organizations that I'm here to represent are focused on. So I'm here to talk about both Greentown Labs, which is the largest clean tech incubator in the US, and Greentown Learn, which is its sister nonprofit, which I lead. I lead it out of Greentown Labs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationship between the two organizations. Greentown Labs is not as long-standing as many. Greentown Labs started in 2008 with 4 startups who are committed to helping mitigate climate change in a sub-basement outside of Boston. And they realized that if they pooled their resources, they could afford the rent of that sub-basement and extend their runway a little bit. Those early days for these startups are really crucial as far as spend. So this really caught on fast. I'm sure you've seen other examples of co-working and co-living where you're based. And today, Greentown Labs actually hosts over 95 companies in one place. They're all committed to solving the biggest energy, efficiency, and environmental challenges that the world faces today. Now, most of these startups have at least a hardware component if they're not hardware-based. And in the innovation ecosystem today, most of the resources are actually more tailored for software. This is a problem when you talk about solving climate change, because it's a physical problem. We're experiencing the physical results today. Rising oceans, melting ice caps, extreme weather events. So the solutions are going to have a physical component, even when we're dealing with software. We have one company that has AI for maximizing when we pull energy from the grid, which is really crucial to reducing the excessive ways in which we use and create energy. But of course, if they're interacting with the energy grid, there's a physical component that plugs into that grid in order for it to use that AI. So one of the challenges that these companies out of Greentown Labs faced from an early stage was actually thinking about how to design these incredible solutions they were coming up with in a way that was commercially viable and scalable, so it could have that large-scale impact we're looking for when we talk about mitigating climate change. One of the first initiatives that was built to address this is called the Manufacturing Initiative, and that is housed now in Greentown Learn, which is the nonprofit sister of the incubator, and I run that organization. What we saw and see still today consistently is very, very smart people coming up with first-time solutions for these problems, and they're very oftentimes coming from an incredibly technical background. So they'll build a prototype and it works. It solves the problem. It's the first time this has happened. But their design for scaling that is not something they're actually going to be able to do in a financially viable way. And this is where what we call in the innovation ecosystem the valley of death comes into play, especially for hardware startups. They often spend their upfront capital in early runs that aren't correctly designed and actually have to close shop. What that means when you're talking about an organization that's actually addressing these challenges in climate change is these solutions don't come to market. We never see the results on scale. And so by offering through the manufacturing initiative to introduce these startups to the manufacturers they'll need to work with, we're able to actually create an early intervention. They come to us because they need those supply chain connections, but as we interact with them, we're able to reroute them if they're going down the wrong path. It's not unusual for startups to assume that, for example, they need injection molding in their production. That's a very expensive process. For example, we recently worked with a startup called Non-Spec that designs very affordable, flexible prosthetics. Their entry market is India, and this will actually solve a really visible problem if you've ever been to India, in people who don't have a limb and can't afford a replacement, but they wanted to use injection molding. And that would have actually taken away this value proposition of affordability. We were able to reroute them to plastic machining, and now they're starting to produce at scale, and they will have that runway to bring their product to market and have that impact. So Greentown Labs and Greentown Learn are incredibly collaborative. We're a small, nimble nonprofit, but being based out of Greentown Labs gives us this great test kitchen of these 90-plus startups that we learn from. We build programs like the Manufacturing Initiative, and then we scale them out through the region, having footholds in other incubators and space providers, so we can maximize our impact as well.
Great. Yeah, you, before you also said, so you're based in Boston, and you have like your local network also with manufacturers, like local, and on the other side, you would like really to engage with the broader network, also with software companies to support them. And so how is like the way so that you support the startups so that in the end they really make an impact and really scale, so like what you mentioned, and what are the most of the challenges?
Well, as we spoke about a little bit earlier, a very significant challenge for a lot of these technical startups is determining where is the best go-to market for them, but also simple things like access to machine shops and to the software where they can actually model out early drafts. This is the type of thing that a small startup often can't afford. So having a large community like Greentown Labs and the broader Greentown Learn footprint, this allows the startups not only to share best practices and knowledge with each other, and also to say, hey, engaging with the Manufacturing Initiative was really impactful. You really should do that, because entrepreneurs listen to other entrepreneurs more than they listen to anybody else. But we're also able to give them access to a machine shop, to a wet lab, to very expensive infrastructure that they couldn't afford on their own. And of course, through our partners like Dassault Systèmes, to many different software platforms that they're able to use in their design process. This is the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in benefits to over 90 startups every year, and it's because of the way we've aggregated the community that we're able to offer all of these supports.
Great. So Oke, on your side, so you just said, so Mini Living, so it's really like a brand at Mini, and so you're leading it, and it's a very also new initiative you're running at Mini. So how is also like the relationship to the more executive level at Mini, and also that they get aware of this change, the social change, what you are doing, and also the impact and the relationship to the city?
Yeah, I'm in an ambivalent position because I came from the outside to Mini, which is obviously a car brand still. But on the other hand, I have to say, like, I found a very nice platform to work on top of. Like, our executive board is super supportive of those new ideas. Mini is a brand that allows a lot of experimentation and freedom. And I think it's also an interesting time to work in the car industry because there's a lot of change happening, not just in terms of how to run cars in the future, but also like, is it maybe access over ownership? Like, what would be a new way how to use mobility inside of cities? And I think what everybody understands is that you cannot separate those elements from each other. The city life is a holistic way of living, and I think if you think of the city more as an ecosystem of services that you can just use in the future rather than to own it, I think that's something that the board members totally have in the back of their heads as well, and support the idea to bring a broader product. Always sounds a bit harsh, but it's basically providing different layers of urban life to create a more like a holistic version of how to live in the future.
Great. So Laura, on the other side, so you are working very close with with the small startups who are in the phase really to scale, and they can bring a huge impact to sustainability and climate change for also for the city. So how is also the interaction with the city, with the small startups, so that in the end they could really bring a huge impact in this field?
That's a great question. Thank you. We have a large number of startups that are looking at an initial municipal application. And this is another example of where being part of the Greentown community is advantageous. We're able to make some of those introductions for early pilots and contracts. Municipalities can be, in the US at least, a little bit of a challenging first client. So having those introductions and having connections to other startups that have gone through the process really helps speed up the process. So, for example, there is a robotics and AI company that is currently incubating at Greentown Labs and also getting materials help from Greentown Learn that deploys into the sewers a robot that can gather data and then analyze it to tell us, well, anything we want to know about kind of the chemical makeup. But the first application is the opioid crisis. What they're able to do is then take that information and provide a map. And you can actually look based on what they've analyzed in the sewer and see where there are clusters of opioid use in the municipality. And then as you implement interventions, you're able to monitor it and see if they're actually working. This could really move the needle on what has become a really significant crisis, at least in the US in recent years. And so we've been able to make some introductions, and they have some initial clients now in some municipalities around Massachusetts.
Great. Yeah, and so I think also on the design side, so there will be also a lot of solutions coming, and I think also for your startups, what you see in which field we also need like improvement on the design solution side, and really also to bridge the gap, what you said, with the physical world and with the digital, to support these startups.
Well, as we were talking about earlier, with physical products or these startups that have a physical component, one thing that's really interesting is if folks are involved in the innovation world a little bit, you might know about the lean startup model, and it's to test things out, try them, get live feedback. It's very much a design process. It's constant communication with your customers so that you can launch an MVP, a minimal viable product, and then you can iterate on it fast. You can fail fast, you can figure out the kinks, and you can move on. You actually can't do this in the same way when you're dealing with physical products. The upfront capital costs are intensive. A lot of investors are nervous about physical products because it doesn't have that quick, rapid scalability of software. So getting design right early is what makes and breaks a lot of these companies. And they often don't know, as we all don't know, what they don't know. So the fact that they come to us looking for supply chain, contracting, engineering help at Greentown Learn actually allows us to do sort of a readiness assessment with them. Are they ready for the kind of manufacturing that they want? Is that really what they need to accomplish their goals with their product? And we're able to, by offering those introductions, then help guide them through the process to ensure that they actually think through design components that they don't yet know they need to think through. And this comes back to that question of, do you really need injection molding? It's very expensive. Sometimes you do because of the specs of the product, but oftentimes we can find a more affordable solution. And again, because we are a community and we're operating on scale, initially the manufacturing initiative was launched because it was hard for startups to find manufacturers that even wanted to work with them. It's a risky business. Now those manufacturers are actually helping to underwrite the program because they've seen the economic value of the flow of the startups through to the manufacturers in the region. And they often now offer free components, prototyping support. So it's very collaborative, but getting that design piece right by engaging with those stakeholders is something that startups often won't even have considered until they come and say, hey, do you know someone who can do sheet metal?
I think really the timing to create like this kind of prototypes, and that you could support the startups really on the phase and make also the time shorter, that they create this first prototypes. And I think it's the same for you, Oke, on the living mini living. So you do create like physical prototypes, test different kind of scenarios also, so that the citizen can go there and really experience it. So what is also you mentioned some of the projects you are now doing. So it's also from the city side that you focus on more a larger scale. So you mentioned you would like to scale it in different kind of areas, but maybe you can give us a little bit more details on this.
On the scaling, yeah, I mean, what we try to achieve is we collected ideas over the last 3.5 years, working with super interesting designers and architects to basically start a discussion and a dialogue what could help and support a more or better way how to live in the cities in the future. And that's why we came to Milan, to Salone and these things, to really start a platform of exchange, because we believe that, times are over when a big company tells what to do in the future. I think the good ideas are developed together somehow. And I have the same feeling talking to, for example, the Chinese government, which is super interesting. I have a couple of meetings with them, and the stuff, what we're doing, this seamless merge between work and living places, doesn't really exist in most countries. And same in Germany as well. You always are restricted by limitations in terms of regulations, norms, these kind of things. What is an apartment? What is a workspace? And it's really interesting how really the Chinese government is very supportive to bring something new as something more experimental to Shanghai as a city, but it takes a while, because in the beginning they were asking okay, what is this now? Is this an office building or is this a living building? And there was weird ideas that they came up with as well. Maybe it's just a building where you work and sleep, but work was the main part of it. Of course, that was not our idea. But I think that's something. Also in New York, it's the same thing on our project. You have to redefine the categories so they fit, I think, a lifestyle which is definitely out there. I mean, you have a whole generation growing up with a sharing economy, all these things. And I think regulations and norms and also politics need to react to that to create more flexibility for designers, to challenge conventions and to be open to experiment more, to create really new ideas how to live inside of cities.
And how is your process also to learn from these experiences, bringing it back to Mini and maybe creating also new projects out of it? Are you also collaborating with other partners? Or maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think I tried it in the first slide, but maybe I think what we're trying to change is to open up the company and to open up this hermetic brand. We place a product like a car and people love it or they don't love it as a given thing, rather to start a dialogue. So the place in New York, ADO, is open for everybody. There's constant discussions, there's things happening like this there's products being developed by the startups, but the main thing is really it's a public space. It's not a privatized thing, and it's also not something where Mini places the answer to everything. It's really opening up and this hermetic boundary that a lot of big companies in the corporate world have. And I think that's something where our project helped also, let's say, the automotive sector and inside of the company to think in new ways how they can start designing a car for the future.
Great. So what do you see, so when we have now the title Design Impact Social Change, so what is your standpoint on this, really on these two topics? So maybe we can start with you, Laura.
Well, I was very excited. I personally came from an art background before I went into the business and the innovation world, so I'm always really excited about conversations that sort of marry art and business. And I had to really think a bit about all the different angles that this conversation could take, because there is a design element to our approach to helping startups. There's a design element to their approach to figuring out how to scale and thrive and have that impact. And there's, of course, the design component for us all as we're thinking about how do we engage with this world and these innovations and these new ways of living in a way that will be more sustainable for the future. So I was excited because it had some of my hot button words, but I also thought, wow, we could take this conversation in so many directions. I'm excited to see where it goes and what questions the audience has for us as well.
Great.
Yeah, I think from our side, we really try to investigate like how can design inform people and the way people live inside of cities to a way that they feel more engaged, that they feel more connected. So I have a high belief that design can definitely help to create a social change. It also has the understanding that you feel also more responsible and more responsive to your living surrounding. Meaning, what does it take to really create a sense of home in an apartment building? Because if I would move to Shanghai, given that, I don't know, I have a new job, I don't know, new girlfriend, whatever, I'd probably end up in a high-rise building on the 40th floor, like not connecting to anybody, like just meeting people maybe in an elevator cabin or in a corridor. And I would never really feel home, probably, in the city. And that's something we try to change with the help of design by creating these public buildings that really allow you to feel connected to a space, to a place, and that really allow you also connect to the people that surround you. Because at the end, that's, I think, why people go to cities. They want to grow. They want to, that's what cities, what's the highest quality that cities can offer is basically connections and the interaction between humans at the end. That's why they are the thriving force of innovation. But I think architecture hasn't done a great job by providing the spaces to achieve that at the end. And that's why I believe that we need to change architecture and create space that really connect people with each other.
So you mentioned also before, so you're like how to make the impact also in the architecture, maybe studies. So you said you're also supporting some universities also with your finding and learnings. So what is also the response from the students on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, with the students, it's actually really interesting because a lot of them come from foreign places. They come to Munich or to New York and they study. And I think, I mean, maybe the student life is still the best life somehow because maybe you end up in a nice community, you know, like, I don't know, you in a dormitory, whatever, where you live. And I mean, like architects have a very lucky position because it involves a lot of teamwork. So you quite easily connect to people when you work in this profession. But if I would think of working in a different field, which is a bit more personal and hermetic, I think I think that the way the students think, and especially with this idea of moving around a lot, like when you're younger, but I have a high belief that we're all urban nomads in a certain point of time, maybe also when we're older. They totally support the idea that we can change apartment typologies and houses in general to create more urban buildings at the end that really allow you to connect to your environment.
Yeah, I think it's also very important for this interdisciplinary work. So talking also with other disciplines and like what you mentioned, like this diversity in the living, really observing it and also learn about how they work together. And as you mentioned, this is interdisciplinary, so it's not only the startups. Of course, the main focus is on clean tech, but there's a lot of inputs and also how they can make an impact with the city. So they need to understand how a city works and how they also in which departments they can make an impact. So this kind of interdisciplinary also knowledge, I think it's important. Yeah, so I would like also to take some questions from the audience. So, do you have some? So maybe I start with one, or maybe you like. Yeah. So how do you see it? So from your side, so you're really working very close with the startups. It's more like from the roots, and okay, now you are more from the corporate side and bringing like this big project to a city. So what is like the difference between both, and how we also from an organization standpoint at the Dassault System can support, for example, your ground work with the startups?
It's really interesting. I'm sure there actually are a lot of parallels in the work that we're both involved with, you more directly and me in a supportive role. But one of the things that I've heard consistently from the startups is early on these teams are maybe 2 to 5 people when they first start working with us. So they don't have a whole group of people, to your point, with different areas of expertise. It's often 2 people with engineering degrees. And so what I've heard from them often after they've been in the community for a while, this gets back again to you don't know what you don't know, that one of the biggest benefits was just being surrounded by other people who are trying to tackle these tough problems and maybe had other disciplinary expertise or the ability to connect them with other expertise. So that, I think, is a really important component of the work that we do. And it goes far beyond manufacturing. We have marketing office hours. We're launching a go-to-market training module, but really helping them access the expertise and the focus that they need outside of their own strengths is very crucial to startup survival early on.
Yeah, and from our side, it's with an overall Minibrand perspective, I think it's a little bit similar. It's building the bridge between innovation and creative thinking, maybe lacking funding, or like also like, let's say, a future-oriented business perspective. And I think that's something that we basically support through all of our programs. Like the Startup Accelerator, of course, is basically like similar to what you're doing, but also like in our fashion segment, it's all about young designers that bring innovative ideas to the table. We don't want to work with like super established persons, because we're really interested in like fresh new ideas and creativity, and to also support them to build up their own careers and to get their thinking out there. And I think that's something that a big company like BMW or Mini can actually really achieve, to build a bridge to the future in a personal career, and also build a bridge to provide projects and opportunities to work on, because a lot of young creatives are missing that opportunity. There's great ideas out there, but there's just no chance to implement them. And I think what we're trying to achieve is to basically create a platform for those ideas to evolve.
Great. So, Asa, some question. So we have one.
Yes, hello. After Toshiko Mori's presentation, I think one thing that I'm interested in, maybe for you, Oke, to tell us more about is the Hutong. Going into a city in a very different culture, and a very old city for that matter, that is involving it at its own pace. How do you? What's your view on architecture and housing specifically? You know, the Hutong architecture being very specific has. When I was there, which was a long time ago, it was being destroyed. Yet we see the value of it. So could you maybe expand on your viewpoint on these views in architecture?
Yeah,
and housing?
it's two things basically. One is like a little bit related to what you were pointing out. So we worked on the project with a young Chinese architect that's based in Beijing that helped us to understand the culture, the tradition, but also to understand the new Chinese mindset. So we always work with the local designer together to develop the projects. And he grew up in the Hutongs. Has one of his offices in the Hutong still, and I mean the Hutongs they're also ambivalent. They are courtyard buildings, so they feel quite private on the inside, but the life between the Hutong buildings is basically a public living room. So there's a lot of life happening on the narrow streets between the Hutongs. And his idea was to take this idea of the life that happened between the buildings and really create a building that changes, that opens up to this. That's why it's so completely open in the front. To bring this atmosphere into the home, let's say, like create a more public Hutong typology for the future. And I think that has two layers that are interesting to reflect their own cultural background, because something that especially young Chinese creators are really at the moment really pushing. They don't want to copy paste anymore. Like they really have a belief in terms of where they're coming from, but it also symbolizes the change in the mindset to bring something new also to China, not being stuck on what has been done 1,000 times already. So it was a very, very interesting collaboration, getting a lot of insight into China and how people think, and especially I think how the young Chinese creatives think about their own way to work and how they see also their country in the future somehow, or their perspectives of their cities in the future.
Maybe one related question to this. So you showed like you have like different projects around the world. What is like? Are there like some reasons to go to one of the other city? And
yeah, I mean the cities we picked so far are basically these major places where like the people are basically suffering from the same things. Like you have super high rents, cramped housing conditions. The real estate market is not really answering the needs that people have in those cities. And I mean, you know New York probably as well, right? I mean, there needs to be different answers than what's happening at the moment for a billionaire road, like building apartments just for like super rich people to invest in rather than to live in.
When are you coming to Boston?
Hopefully soon. So I think there's, of course, like there's a lot of different cultural differences between those places, but still, wherever I go and I talk to, especially young people, they want to live in a city, they cannot afford it, they're missing this personal connection, they feel very isolated where they live. And that's something which probably has a similarity between those three places that we're working on at the moment.
Okay, yes, of course.
My question is to Oke. Personally, I have a lot of interest in the relationship between mobility and living, housing. And it's the demonstration also why a lot of car companies are here at the Design Week. But I never see like a concrete influence between the two worlds. Like at Mini, that I follow your work at Mini Living, I never see how your work and the work made by the designer of cars, they can influence each other. So I always see that now the two worlds are really separate. So I'm asking if you have any example of how you are working to make these two fields connecting. So one is dynamic, and which is mobility, and the other one is static, which is housing. And maybe housing it's becoming dynamic, and mobility is becoming static. So I'm asking to you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's interesting. It also has two answers. One is what we do with the apartments and the living design, let's say, that we proposed and brought to the table over the last couple of years. It's very related to what Mini stands for, meaning a small spatial experience at the end, while still not sacrificing anything. So we're really interested in how can you create small living spaces while still offering all. So there's a close bond in terms of design thinking between the car and the living projects we've done so far. But the second layer is that, for example, in the project in Shanghai, there will be a shared fleet, and there's also a seamless access between those elements. So you in the future, of course, it will be digital, but we have one thing that connects and opens up all those doors. So opens up the building, your apartment, the different areas you can use, but also the mobility aspect, and then connects you also to further locations to connect yourself to the city itself. So I think that's something that we have an idea about the future. What Mini can bring to the table is more like a partner in crime that enables you to unlock the city to a level which is not like the Truman Show hermetic experience, but really it allows you to rely on somebody that's been in Shanghai for a while already and maybe knows the cool places and the cool institutions to connect to, and it's just a little support to connect you to the place in a more holistic understanding.
You often have exchange with the car designers in the same company, or you really are two very separated teams at this level?
I would like to say that we have a constant exchange, but it's not. But the reason is more like everything what they do is super confidential, and they don't even allow me to be part of this process. But I mean, of course, I know what's happening, and I mean, I know that, you know, like we have all the shared mobility topics coming up. We have the extension of the car being like the extension of the apartment, about personalization and autonomous driving in the future. There's a lot of similar thinking, but even I'm not allowed to see what's the real future, what they're working on at the moment.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much to the audience, and I would really like to thank you very much. So it was very interesting, and I was very excited also to hear more about your projects and how we can impact the social change through design. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.